place booth. For the orchid glass pendant, it's Sue Ealer. Is she still here? So yes. And for the gray whale pendant, Vicki Miller, who also won an auction item. For the posters, Kim Clarkin, Pam Wren, Eileen Ryan, Edith Hitchings, and I don't know, this last one I don't think she wants it, Lori Gojic. She just said, I've got to get one. I don't think I'll win. So glad you got yours.
Now let me quickly introduce Don Nobiello with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, oil spill response and recovery specialist, who will give us a brief update on that. And just let me say that when a derelict vessel sank in Penn Cove a couple of months ago and made a huge mess, Don was our interface. Don told us what was going on, completely brought down the barriers between us and the agency so that we could talk to them and they could talk to us through Don. So he's very much appreciated, so we look forward to hearing from him. So Don.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I am going to talk to you about the threat of oil spills to our southern resident killer whales and some of the work we're doing to address that threat. First is what is the problem with oil and whales? Based on primarily the experience during the Exxon Valdez oil spill in the late 80s, found that orca that were in the area when this oil spill occurred suffered extreme mortality. In particular, there's a large number of orca whales, different pods and groups that live in Prince William Sound, at least a majority of the time. But two in particular, a resident pod called the AB pod, which started with about 36 members, in the first couple of years after the spill, lost 14 members and continued to lose some, but had recruitment, and today, 20 plus years since then, is beginning to recover. Another group, the AT1s, which are a transient group, they started with 22 members, lost 8 or 9 in the first couple of years, and have continued to lose members and have had no successful reproduction since that time. They're down to 7 members now, and in all likelihood will go extinct in the relatively near future. So that's the threat. Now, what the exact mechanism of how this works is not entirely known, because unfortunately, when these whales disappeared, they just disappeared. There were not bodies recovered and necropsies done to test whether oil was a particular culprit. But these are unprecedented levels of mortality in these groups. So it's a pretty strong indication that oil caused this mortality. And the very likely way it did this is most likely through inhalation. As oil spills out on the water, depending on the type of oil, but in this case it was crude oil, which is a mixture of many, many different types of compounds, what they call light or aromatic parts of the oil, which are the most toxic parts to even humans, these evaporate off. And you can imagine as a whale would surface through this and take in a great gulp of air, that those vapors could be damaging their lungs in something that would, either in the short term or over the next few months, impact their health to the point that they pass away. Secondarily, it's suspected, particularly for transient type whales, that they could be eating oiled prey items. In particular, harbor seals wandered into the oil a lot, got fairly oiled. If they were being consumed, that's another possible way. But again, the science on that is not real solid. But that evidence gives us a lot of concern that if there was an oil spill around our killer whales, they could be impacted. Now, why ours in particular are of concern is, first off, they are a relatively low population, less than 90 animals, and their population has not been on a nice upward trend. It's been down or bobbling along. So that population, which has resulted in them being listed under the Endangered Species Act, as we heard about earlier. Second, as I suspect you'll hear more from Dr. Peter Ross in the next presentation, our group of whales, the southern residents, already has a very high load of toxics in their bodies, and this might further weaken them for sustaining an injury from more toxics coming from an oil spill. And finally, unlike whales in parts of Southeast Alaska or even in BC, our whales are really around the transport of a lot of oil. The map on the right side of your screen here shows the purple is the main routes for shipping. And a couple years ago when I last looked in 2010, there were over 2,300 tankers that entered through the Strait of Juan de Fuca and came in. Most of the tankers go either through Haro Strait up to Canada or through Rosario Strait on the east side of San Juan Island up to Anacortes or Cherry Point. A few tankers may go south. But in addition to those tankers that have millions of gallons of oil on board, there's over 6,500 freighters which carry tens to hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel as fuel oil. And those go through the simpler routes. So literally every day there's at least a handful of large ships that any one of them could create an oil spill large enough to do damage. The nightmare scenario that keeps me awake some nights is if on a fine June, July day when the superpod is forming out off the west coast of San Juan Island, one of these ships has some kind of mishap that causes it to run aground, get ripped open, leak a large quantity of oil. If that were to happen, a very large percentage of the population of our southern resident killer whales could be exposed to oil all at one time. And one can imagine that that could even be an extinction event over the next few years. So, what are we doing to deal with this potential threat? Admittedly, hopefully that's a very rare event, but it only has to happen once to be very bad. The consequences are so dire. Well, the short answer is what we're doing is we're doing a lot of planning in the last few years. You're probably not very familiar with the world of oil spill response, but there's a master document that guides all the state, federal, and local governments that work in a spill response. It's called the Northwest Area Contingency Plan, and in the last 2 or 3 years, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has worked with NOAA and the Coast Guard and other members of the spill response community to amend that plan to include provisions to think about what the impact of an oil spill could be on killer whales and put together a hazing plan, for lack of a better word. Some people don't like hazing, but the idea is to keep orca whales from entering or staying in a surface spill of oil. Now, what exactly is in the plan? First, it sort of identified some high-risk areas where the abundance of killer whales and the abundance of oil could coincide. We worked very extensively with NOAA, who, through their authority, pre-authorized the lead person for dealing with oil spills, which is the federal on-scene coordinator. In our area, that's the commander of the Coast Guard sector in Seattle. Pre-authorized him to use various techniques to deter killer whales from entering or staying in a spill area. We looked at some ways that we could further authorize other methods if new science indicated they were more viable, and also established some minimum requirements for monitoring any of these hazing operations. Most of you here will not be surprised that the areas of high risk are, in the summer, anyway from May to September, the San Juan Islands, particularly the west side and up by Point Roberts. And also that later on in the year, September through about now, the whales are often sighted in South and Central Puget Sound in higher numbers. The advantage of having with these areas identified, if there's a spill now in these areas, people will immediately think, okay, what about the whales and what can we do about it? And as I mentioned earlier, the basic plan is to use hazing to keep these whales out of the oil. And I mentioned there were 3 specific methods that we're going to use. And the 3 pre-approved methods are first one is hovering helicopters. This has the advantage of, if the time comes it's needed, you can deliver a helicopter at about 125 knots to anywhere you need to relatively quickly. It also has the advantage of, from that perch, you can often see the whales a lot easier and get in close. The disadvantage of this particular method is it's never ever been tried. It's based on pretty much anecdotal evidence from when military heavy helicopters have encountered a pod of killer whales, and they have been observed by folks to be disturbed by that, to move away. So we would hope that it might be able to help, but it's not, the science on it is not really excellent. The second method that's pre-approved is something called Comet Pipes. Now these are simply 8-foot metal pipes sealed with an end cap and rigged with suspension rope that can be hung over the side of a small vessel, struck with a hammer, and they make a ringing sound underwater that many cetaceans find objectionable. They were developed, sort of unfortunately, but maybe we can put them to a better use. They were developed in the harvest fisheries in Japan. If you've ever seen the movie The Cove, these are the kind of things that they hammer on to drive whales into the cove. They have been successfully used on killer whales in embayment up in Alaska, where a group of killer whales got stranded inside a lagoon and were stuck in there for some time and actually were suffering severe health. Some of them had died, and they were successfully driven out using this technology. So the science that this actually will work is quite a bit better. The only disadvantage is it's so much labor intensive to get people out in the right places to bang on these pipes and dissuade the whales from going in that direction. The third pre-approved method can be used in conjunction with the last, and that is what's called seal bombs or underwater firecrackers. These have been used in various kinds of wildlife hazing, and particularly with sea lions. They basically have a fuse that will continue to burn when it's underwater. There's some weight in the bottom of the firecracker device that makes it sink. As they light them, they throw them over the side, and they will detonate, and that sends out a shock wave that is disturbing to marine mammals. Now, all 3 of these methods, NOAA has done a lot of work. We worked with them to develop exact protocols on how they would be used. So they're not just going to go out and throw these things willy-nilly at the animals. There's exact protocols for how close you can be, when you should use them, what the distance between the vessels are, and all those things have been prescribed. So here's what we hope. Well, first, we hope we will never, ever, ever have to do this. But if there were to be a spill that would impact, the first move for the response will be to locate and try and track the whales. And that's where groups like Orcanet will come in. The unified command that runs the oil spill response would be contacting NOAA, and via NOAA or directly Orcanet and other groups like the Whale Watch Association, and even a group like Scott Veers and the people who have the hydrophones, to help us find where the whales are at that particular time and which way they're going, so that we can put together a plan to put teams and equipment between the whales and the oil to deter them from heading that way. And finally, because it's very important to know what happens to the whales, to put in some minimum monitoring requirements to, first of all, make sure that whatever they're doing as far as hazing these whales is working, and if it's not working, try something else, and that it's not doing more harm to the whales than the oil itself would. So that's what we hope would happen. So what are our next steps? This has all been planning so far, but luckily, working with our friends at the Island Oil Spill Association, this March, late March, we're going to be doing our first field deployment of hazing operation, where we're going to work with them to put out the Comet Pipes off the west coast of San Juan Island. I think we're going to try and field 6 boats with pipes. It's still in development exactly what we're going to do, whether we may not even end up actually banging on the pipes, because we don't want to be harassing whales in violation of the Marine Mammal Protection Act if there's no oil spill. But we're going to be, from doing this, we will learn, it'll train the people who we hope will be able to do this, and just by doing the logistics of actually moving everything and getting people out there, I think we will find out some things that we may not have anticipated about how hard it is, or things we can improve on making it faster and more effective. The second thing we're going to be looking at is, through this and other groups, is finding the right kind of people who can actually do this. You can't call your general contractor to have them go deal with whales. You need someone you want to get a pool of people who actually have experience observing whales, know which whales they're looking at, or at least know how to photo document them in a way that people who do know who they are can figure out who they are, so that if we have to haze whales, we know who got hazed, and we have some evaluation of how they're responding. Is it being effective? Are they turning? Is it doing something bad, like getting them to split up and go in all directions, which might be worse than not hazing them at all? And finally, not finally, but in addition, we're looking at new technologies that might improve our ability to haze whales. In particular, in the last couple of years, there's been development of a new experimental hydro speaker, which plays back sounds through the full range of cetacean hearing. Most of what we deal with is for human hearing, which is a much lower range than cetaceans, as most of you probably know. But if we had a device like that, if a commercial version of that device could be developed, and we could record things like the Comet Pipe sounds and other stimulus that could be used for deterring whales from entering an area, we may be able to more simply and quickly send vessels out equipped with that equipment to put up deterrents. So I just wanted to give you I wanted to give you the sense of what the threat is and what we're doing about it at this time. So thank you very much. If you have other questions, sounds like I'm already out of time, but you certainly contact me.
You can take questions for a minute or two while we load up the other.
All right, I guess I can take a couple of questions. Yes, in the back.
In all due respect, I appreciate you're trying to figure out hazing methods. I have some serious questions about how effective they would be. My question is, last time I checked, we had to have tugs that escorted our tankers up into those areas, right? And the Canadians, it was voluntary for them to have tugs, escort tugs for their tankers going to Vancouver. In my opinion, the real choke point, the danger because the part of narrow trade work is very narrow, a lot of current. And if you don't have a tug that, if you lose power, you're going to be in big trouble. Has there been any advancements in making the Canadians come up to snuff on escorts and so forth?
The question is about, essentially about getting tugs to enhance prevention of its spill up on the Canadian side. The direct answer to your question is not from Fish and Wildlife. There is dialogue between its nation to nation, between U.S. Department of State and Canadians. In dialogue with them, we express our concern about that. And just to address your sort of premise, I completely agree. The prevention of spills is way better As I mentioned, low-flying helicopters never been tested. Even the ones that have affected, it's never been shown that you could establish a perimeter that would keep a lot of whales out of a large contaminated area forever. And we're doing what we can, but prevention is definitely the preferred alternative. And so if you have, anybody here has any influence with powers that be on prevention, on adding tugs, more escorts, they do that in Southeast Alaska. There are a number of things that have been done on the outer coast. There's an area to be avoided that's been established to keep large commercial traffic farther offshore. The escort tug, not escort tug, excuse me, what's called rescue tug has been stationed in Nia Bay so that if vessels have a problem out there and break down, instead of just letting them drift in and hit the rocks, hopefully this rescue tug will be able to intervene. And there's a vessel traffic system that tracks vessels through the Strait of Juan Fuca and tries to keep other vessels away. So there's a number of things, but I'm always for more that could prevent these things from happening in the first place, because I've been doing these since I was actually on the Exxon Valdez spill. You can never put the genie back in the bottle after it's come out of the hull. You can do what you can, and that's good to do that, but the best answer is prevention. Yes, sir.
Is there any way to put some kind of chemicals in the fuel, in the cargo oil, to make it solidify? So if the ship breaks down, we can have a big lump.
The question is there a way to make the oil in the vessels solidified so that it wouldn't leak out? The answer is yes, as far as there are chemicals that do that. The problem is it would greatly increase the cost, because now instead of just pumping it out with a pump, you're going to have to basically shovel it out or have some other device that can move that solid back out of the ship. So, and I think my time is up.